Hilchos Issurei Biah Perek Shleisha Asar, the laws of forbidden relationships, chapter 13. Today's and tomorrow's chapters come directly on the heels of what was discussed in yesterday's chapter. In chapter 12, we spent a long time talking about the painful prohibition of intermarriage. The idea that a Jewish man is forbidden to marry a non-Jewish woman and a Jewish woman is forbidden to marry a non-Jewish man. In that context, the Rambam introduced the idea of a ger, of a convert, the fact that if somebody converts to the Jewish faith, they then become a full-fledged Jew and are, of course, allowed to marry Jewish. With the exception of a couple of nations, as we learned yesterday, some are allowed after a couple of generations, some are never allowed, etc. But once you mention the concept of a convert, it becomes necessary to clarify what does it take, according to the Torah, to fully become a convert and actually become a member of the Jewish family. That's the topic for today and for tomorrow. And until today, the topic of conversion remains controversial, not because the Torah's stance on conversion is controversial, as a matter of fact, it's quite clear-cut, but because of what's happened in society, in which extreme pain has been caused to the Torah true, authentic Orthodox community by such people who convert non-Jews and fool them into thinking that they're a member of the Jewish faith when in fact they are not, because they haven't followed the proper protocol of conversion. And this causes tremendous problems of intermarriage, as a matter of fact, because these conversions are completely non-binding, and then these so-called converts go on to marry Jews. This creates tremendous problems in families, the consequences of which we see all the time. And the Rabbi talked about this at great length in the 70s and the 80s when Israel passed the infamous law of return, allowing even Jews who even people who only had a Jewish father but not a Jewish mother, to take the name and the title Jew, which the Rebbe said then would cause also an incredible and immense amount of issues within the Jewish community, which it actually has, unfortunately, till today. And in the diaspora as well, we're suffering from it too. It's very important to be aware of, if you are a fully fledged Jew, when deciding on a partner in terms of marriage, to make sure that they are not converted by people and by movements that have no recognition by the Torah true community. And of course, ideally, to look for people that are coming from a Jewish lineage. This way, all problems can be avoided. Of course, on the flip side, a person who embraces the Jewish faith fully and converts according to the Orthodox standard, not only is considered a full-fledged Jew, but as the Rambam himself writes elsewhere, and we'll talk about this again at the end of the chapter, the Rambam himself writes elsewhere that he is connected directly to Hashem in a way that no other Jew can claim to be. Regular Jew, in the Rambam's words to the famous Rabbi Ovadia Hager, who lived in his times, a convert who went by the name of Ovadia, the Rambam told him, you should know, our connection as Jews runs genealogically. We trace ourselves back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but you, the convert, is directly connected to Misha Amar V'Haya Ha'olam, the one who said, and the world came into being, i.e. Hashem. And so with that in mind, we approach this very important chapter, the chapter which dictates the laws of conversion. Says the Rambam, Halacha Aleph, Bishloisha Dvarim Nichnesu Yisrael Labris. Originally, when the Jews entered into their covenant with Hashem at the giving of the Torah, there were three steps, or three things, that served as entry points for the Jewish people into the covenant. B'mila, utvila, b'karban. Circumcision, immersion in a kosher mikveh, and bringing a sacrifice. Halacha Beis, the Rambam gives us the source. Where do we see these three things took place at the original establishment of the Jewish covenant with Hashem? Mila haisa b'mitzrayim. The circumcision took place while they were still in Egypt. Shanemar, as it says, one of the commandments surrounding the Korban Pesach, the Passover sacrifice, was V'chol orel lo yoichal boy. This is the verse on top of the screen here. And it says that any uncircumcised person may not eat from the Passover sacrifice. Hence, every Jew at that point had to undergo a circumcision. Moloi Sam Moshe Rabbeinu, says the Rambam, historically we know Moshe Rabbeinu gave them all a circumcision. Shekulam bitlu bris milah b'mitzrayim, because all the Jewish people, unfortunately, although Avraham Avinu, the first Jew, had received the commandment of circumcision, unfortunately, over the years of slavery, all the Jewish people had stopped giving their children, their boys, a bris milah, a circumcision. Chutz mishevet Levi, with the exception of the tribe of Levi, val zeh nemar, about which it says, Moshe Rabbeinu said this in his last day on earth when he blessed each tribe. His blessing to Levi included the words ubrischa yinsoiru. They guard your covenant. That was a reference to the fact that always, even in the tough times, even in slavery, the tribe of Levi had given their children a bris. But outside the tribe of Levi, everybody had stopped, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu was required to give each of them a circumcision first to be able to eat the Passover sacrifice, but later on it turned out to be the first step of a larger process, the process of bringing all the Jewish people into the covenant with Hashem. Halacha Gimel Utvila Haisa Bamidbar Kaidem Matan Torah. The immersion happened in the desert after the Jews left Egypt, just before the giving of the Torah. Shenemar, as it says, one of the commandments that Hashem gave Moshe Rabbeinu in preparation for the giving of the Torah was to tell the Jewish people, V'kidashtam hayoim umachar, sanctify them today and tomorrow, v'chibsu simloisam, and they shall wash their clothes. This reference, washing clothes, is a reference, as we have interpreted it by oral tradition, to immersion. The korban, they also had to bring a sacrifice, shenemar, as it says. In the verse, which actually in the Torah is recorded after the giving of the Torah, but as we have it in oral tradition, happened before the giving of the Torah, it says, Vayishlach esnare b'nei Yisrael vayalu oilos. Moshe Rabbeinu sent forth the youths of Israel, and they brought up burnt offerings, al yedei kol Yisrael ikrivum, which we have again by tradition. This means that they sacrificed these sacrifices on behalf of the entire Jewish people. And such, we have circumcision, immersion, and the sacrifice being brought as the three stages of entering the covenant. Therefore, says the Rambam, that preparatory stage to the giving of the Torah serves as the model. V'chein l'doirei, so too for all generations. If and when an idol-worshipping Gentile wishes to enter the covenant, and to take shelter under the wings of the divine presence, and he accepts upon himself the yoke of the Torah. Taking upon yourself the yoke of the Torah is not part of the conditions for conversion. It's a prerequisite for the conditions to even happen. Part of the will, part of the approach to conversion is accepting upon yourself the yoke of the Torah. Another reason why the Reform and conservative conversions are completely non-binding, because those movements don't even believe in the divinity of the Torah in its fullest sense, and of course do not subscribe to the full extent of Torah authority. Hence, anybody who converts through such movements, by default, is not accepting the full yoke of the Torah. And I have to say it, even though it pains me, because it has to be said. Such movements, conversions are completely unqualified, completely have no meaning. And therefore, it's very important to do research in today's day and age to make sure that a conversion is done only by orthodox standards. At any rate, we see this here in the Rambam. When a non-Jew approaches, he already wants to come into the covenant. He already accepts upon himself the yoke of the Torah fully. Then he will also have to go through, or she will also have to go through these stages of the preparatory process. Tzarich mila utvila v'hartzas karban. The man requires circumcision, immersion, and the atonement achieved by a sacrifice. V'im nekeva, he, of course, if it's a woman, tvila v'karban, circumcision is out, so it's just immersion and a sacrifice. Shenemar, as it says, kochem kager. The convert will be treated like you. This is a verse that's stated in the context of a different mitzvah, but it says that the same law applies to everybody in the Jewish community and a convert. Kochem kager. The same laws that apply to you apply to a convert. The Rambam interprets this verse in a more broader, general sense. Ma'atan b'milo tvila v'hartzas karba, in the same way you Jewish people, full-fledged Jewish people, came into the fold originally by doing circumcision, immersion, and atonement achieved by a sacrifice. Af hager l'dairai, so too the convert for all generations, b'mila utvila v'hartzas karban, will require circumcision, immersion, and the atonement achieved by a sacrifice. Notice here that in the original halacha, when describing the original Jewish people's entry into the covenant, it says the word karban, simply sacrifice. Here, when the Rambam describes the current type of convert, it says hartzoas karban, the atonement achieved by a sacrifice. This difference is very important, as I'll point out in a moment. Halacha hey umahu karban hager. What sacrifice did the convert used to bring? Oilas behema, a burnt offering of an animal. Oishtei teirim, oishnei b'nei yoina. Or if he was not able to afford an animal, he would bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, 2 birds as a sacrifice. Ushneim oila, both would be a burnt offering. Ubizman hazeh shein sham karban. Nowadays, when we do not have a temple, and we don't therefore bring sacrifices, tzarich milo tvila, says the Rambam, of course the convert still needs to do the other 2 parts of the process, circumcision and immersion. Fascinatingly, when the temple will be rebuilt, when Mashiach comes, Yavi Karban, he will then bring a sacrifice. The Talmud has somewhat of a debate if he should separate money, maybe put aside the money for bringing the sacrifice. The problem with that is once you put aside money for a sacrifice, it becomes holy. And if you were to use those funds for some other reason, that itself could be a transgression. So better keep safe. Don't even separate the money. Keep track of the fact that you're a convert. And when Mashiach comes, all the converts will have to bring a sacrifice. Now, if a sacrifice is inherently a part of the process of converting, how could it be that nowadays, so to speak, it sounds like we're missing part of the process? So some have suggested over the ages that the whole idea of bringing a sacrifice is only to entitle this Jew to later on in his lifetime be able to eat sacrifices. In other words, it isn't a part of the general becoming Jewish, it's for a specific element of the Jewish religion. And since the whole idea of sacrificial meat doesn't apply nowadays, so there's no point to bring a sacrifice. The Rebbe, in a famous talk that he delivered, is not happy with this, because in the end of the day, that would mean that you're still a Gentile with regard to sacrificial meat, even if we can't do it technically. But that means a part of you is not fully Jewish, which is impossible to say that all the converts, all the authentic, true converts that have come into the fold over all the 2,000 years since the temple's destruction shouldn't be considered to be a complete convert and still lacking a part of their Jewishness. So the Rebbe actually explains that the three things that the Jewish people used to enter their covenant were of a different nature. They weren't all of the same nature. Two of those things, circumcision and immersion, had an active power. They were the active things or the active acts that brought the Jewish people under the shelter of God's Shekhinah, God's divine presence. The sacrifice is there only to remove an obstacle. It's what's called in Talmudic literature hasaras ma'akev. It removes an obstruction. It doesn't have an active power. It plays more of a negative power, a power of removing something that's obstructing the conversion. And therefore, when we're not in temple times and we don't have the possibility to bring a sacrifice, that obstruction is no longer there, and therefore it's not necessary to be brought. We only remain with the two active parts of the process, the circumcision and the immersion. The reason why they're different, the Rebbe explains, is because when a person converts, there are two things that are happening. One is what actually Hashem describes before the giving of the Torah, Va'avi etchem elai. I'm bringing you to me, which means Hashem is putting within the Jew, or the convert, a holy soul. And then there's another element of the conversion in which the person gets elevated. Besides for getting a Jewish soul, is what's called, also to use the verses in the giving of the Torah's context, Mamlechet Kohanim Begoy Kadosh, a change in the person that he undergoes, becoming a different person and elevated. So hence, the circumcision and the immersion are the ones that serve to bring in the Jewish soul. The next level that the sacrifice achieves, bringing the person up to a higher state, that's already after the Jewish soul is already in him. And therefore, it only serves to remove any other obstructions that could have come up and were more applicable in temple times. Now that we don't have the temple, that is not needed anymore, and we remain with the immersion and circumcision, which fully does bring you into the Jewish fold. At any rate, that's the general concept as it relates to how a convert makes his way into the fold. Says the Rambam Malachavav, Ger Shemol v'loy taval, oy taval v'loy mol. If a convert underwent circumcision, but not immersion, or he immersed without circumcising himself, ein ger, ad sheyamol v'yitbal. He's not a convert till he undergoes circumcision and immersion. V'tzarich litbal b'fnei shleisha. He must immerse in front of 3 people that can serve as a Jewish court. This is another reason why the Reform and Conservative conversions are not binding, because in many of their cases, the courts are not kosher Jewish courts. They're not overseen all by men. Sometimes there are women. That's not a kosher court according to Jewish law. At any rate, since the matter of conversion requires a court, of course, we're not allowed to have a convert immerse on Shabbat or holidays when the courts are not in session, nor by night when the courts are not in session. If the court, after the fact, had him immersed during the night, he's still a valid convert. But it shouldn't be done, ideally. Halacha Zayin, ger katan, a minor convert, let's say the parents are converting and there are children involved. What do you do there? Matbilin oisei al das bezdin. So ideally, a convert has to come on his own volition. So how do you go about converting a child who isn't considered, according to the Torah, to have the mental capacity to make his own fully conscious decisions? So, the Rambam says, the court will put him into the mikveh, the court will have him immerse on their consent. They can act as the agent of the child and convert him. Even though typically, you're only allowed to act on behalf of someone if you're bringing them benefit, not if you're bringing them extra responsibility. Here says the Rambam fascinatingly, Shezchus hilai, being a Jew is considered to be a merit. It's considered to be a benefit. And the child would want it. Of course, by the way, as the halachic authorities say, when it comes bar mitzvah age or bat mitzvah age, the child can protest the conversion and undo it retroactively. However, if they accept the conversion when they come of age, it becomes fully binding retroactively, the fact that he went into the mikveh at the time when he was a child, and he need not perform those rites again. If a pregnant woman underwent conversion and immersed in the mikveh, the child born from the pregnancy, even though right now she's already pregnant, the fetus is there, he doesn't need a new immersion. A general rule, if a non-Jew goes to the mikveh alone and undergoes conversion, or what he believes is conversion alone, even if it's in the presence of two people but not three, not a convert. If a person shows up in town and he says, I underwent conversion in the court of so-and-so and he put me in the mikveh, you can't just show up and say you're a convert. You're not believed to marry a Jew till you can bring witnesses. If a person was already married to a Jewish woman or already married to a Jewish convert and they have children, and then he says, for whatever reason, circumstances came up, they were questioning him about his past, and he reveals, I'm a convert, but I converted alone. I didn't convert in the presence of a court. While he's believed to disqualify himself and his own conversion, he's not believed to disqualify the children. His word cannot disqualify them. Now, the commentaries ask, why would his word disqualify them anyways? He's married to a woman who's Jewish. And so the kids born to a Jewish mother, as we saw yesterday also, are Jewish fully. So the commentaries explain that Rambam is referring to the second case where he was married to a convert, and one might think, since they're both converts, perhaps by his own word he's invalidating both of their conversions, and hence nobody is Jewish, and the kids are not Jewish as well. That's where we say you're only believed on yourself, you're not believed in the children. If he still wants to keep Jewish, of course he has to go and immerse himself again in the presence of a court. Halacha tes giyodes. A Jewess, a woman convert, who we observe following the Jewish ways constantly. She goes to the mikveh when she becomes a nida. She separates truma, the tithes, the proper tithes, from her dough, or the challah from her dough, which she's supposed to do. And similar things. And also if a Jewish convert, a man, is behaving in the ways of the Jews. He goes to the mikveh whenever he experiences a seminal emission. And he performs all the mitzvahs. They can be presumed to be righteous converts. Even though we don't have witnesses who can testify in front of whom they underwent conversion. Nevertheless, if they actually come to mix into the Jewish people, in other words, you might give him an aliyah, include him for the minyan, but now he wants to actually get married. We do not marry such converts that are converts only by default. And what we observe, unless they can bring witnesses or otherwise undergo another immersion in front of us. Since the last thing we know about them is that they're idol-worshipping Gentiles, and the next thing we know, we see them behaving like Jews. So while it's enough to by default presume that they're righteous converts, when it comes to marriage, we're going to go that extra mile. And that's why even today, people claim they're converts, people claim they're Jewish. Typically, we take it at face value. Once they want to get married, that's when we'll do the heavy legwork and the proper research. But if somebody shows up and says, in other words, we don't know anything about him besides for what he's saying, and he tells us, he used to be an idol-worshipping Gentile, and then he underwent conversion in a Jewish court, Neman is believed. And we had this principle a few times in the Rambam already. The same mouth which prohibited him is the same mouth which permits him. In other words, in English, you would say, he's our only source of information. If he was really lying, he could just come and say, I'm Jewish. No one would know any better because we don't know him. So he comes to court and declares, I used to be a Gentile, thereby prohibiting himself. and then he immediately qualifies that by saying, no, but I converted, we have no reason not to believe him. In the last halacha, the last thing, we knew from the outside that they were non-Jewish. Then they began to behave like Jews. That's one story. Here, he shows up and he tells us everything about himself. He's our only source of information. We believe whatever he says. But Medvarim Amurim says the Rambam a general caveat. When does the above apply? In the land of Israel in those times. Everybody can presume to be Jewish in those times. Therefore, the converts could also be presumed if they're behaving in proper Jewish ways. But in the diaspora, and certainly in our times, even in such a case where a man shows up and says, I used to be a non-Jew and now I'm a Jew, he needs to bring a proof, and only then can he marry a Jewish woman. Says the Rambam, I say, and this is an additional stringency that we adopted when it comes to preserving Jewish genealogy. We don't want to just let in a guy into the Jewish people, so we make him or her, the burden of proof is on them to prove that they actually converted. Says the Rambam Malachi Yud Aleph. We're going to segue now from converts to another type of person who needs to go through a procedure to become a full-fledged Jew, and that is a slave. In the same way that we perform a conversion by immersion and circumcision to a convert, so too do we perform circumcision and immersion on the slaves who are bought from idol-worshipping Gentiles, bought with the intent of slavery. You're not planning to have them become full-fledged Jews. They should be. The plan is to have them be slaves of the Jewish person. Nevertheless, they have to undergo a quasi-conversion. Therefore, if somebody buys a slave from an idol-worshipping Gentile, and the slave jumps at the opportunity, dunks in the mikvah, and proclaims himself to be free. He indeed has acquired himself, and the Jewish guy loses a slave. Provided that he says explicitly when he goes to the mikvah, I am dipping in front of you, in front of the court, with the express intent of full conversion. If he's going to the mikvah in front of his master, he doesn't even need to say that explicitly. The very fact that he's being allowed to go to the mikvah on his own volition is already indication that the master is releasing him of his ownership. Once he goes to the mikvah, he's free. Therefore, what's the way for a Jewish person to retain the ownership over his potential slave? At the stage of immersion, the master has to actively push the slave under the water to the point that when he arises from the water, he will arise under the jurisdiction of the owner. He must notify the slave in front of the court that he is having him immerse with the express intent of becoming a slave, not full conversion. A slave also can only immerse in front of 3 people by day, kager, like a convert, because it's a quasi-conversion. When the slave will go free, to cross the threshold between being a slave and a full-fledged Jew, he will require another immersion, also in front of 3 people, also by day, at which point the conversion will be completed and he'll be like a full Jew. At this point, he's not going to have to accept upon himself again the yoke of mitzvahs. Neither are we going to have to tell him the mainstays of our religion, as the Rambam will describe tomorrow. That's part of the procedure. The actual conversion process, at one point, the judges actually notify the convert what he's about to take upon himself and what are some of the fundamentals of the Jewish faith. So that part won't have to happen by the second stage of the slave's conversion because he's already had it at the first stage. They already notified him this fundamentals when he went to the mikvah originally to become a slave. It has to be in a mikvah which is kosher for a nida, for a woman who is biblically forbidden to have relations with. A mikvah that's kosher for her. That's where we have a convert and a slave and a freed slave do their immersion. Whatever is considered to be an intervening substance. When it comes to a nida, we had this the other day that Rambam said that a woman, when she goes to mikvah, cannot have any intervening substances. We're going to explain it at length in the 10th book of the Rambam, but he did mention that point. So whatever things are considered to be intervening substances when it comes to a woman who is going to the mikvah, the same thing is considered to be an intervening substance when it comes to converts, slaves, and slaves that are getting freed and crossing into being a full-fledged Jew. Says the Rambam Halacha Yudalit. In the introduction of the Rambam said that he feels comfortable that any Jewish person should read the 5 books of the Torah and immediately go in to this book of Halacha. Now, in the written Torah, besides for the 5 books of the Torah, there are also the books of the prophets and the writings. Those are also considered to be Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah. And in those prophets, there are some troubling stories, or what seem to be troubling stories, in which some major Jewish figures go ahead and marry non-Jewish women. That's a simple reading of the text. 2 prominent figures who the Rambam will address right now is Shimshon and Shlomo HaMelech, Samson and King Solomon. In both cases, the simple verses record that there was a relationship between them and a non-Jewish woman. Says the Rambam, and he takes a whole halacha and more to address this, which shows you how important and how close to his heart this was. Al ya'ale al daitcha, let it not arise on your mind. Sheshimshon hamoishia es Yisrael, that Samson, the great Samson, who saved Israel, he brought the Jews tremendous salvation. Oishloime melech Yisrael shenikra Yedid Hashem, or that King Solomon, king of Israel, who is called the friend, Yedid means a close friend of Hashem, nasu nashim nachriyas begayusan. Do not think that they married women who were non-Jews in their state of being non-Jews. Yes, they did marry women who were born Gentiles, but they first converted. Elosoid hadavar kachu. The secret of the matter is as follows, and I'll soon elaborate on the precise meaning of that word. Secret of the matter. The secret of the matter is as follows. Shaha mitzvah hanechayna, the proper mitzvah, the proper approach. Whenever a convert or a woman convert comes to convert, we always check. We do research. In general, when a person comes to convert, we do research. Maybe he's trying to get some money, or there's a job appointment waiting for him, or because of the fear, he's coming to enter the religion. If it's a man, we check. Maybe he put his eyes on a Jewish woman. If she's a woman, we check. Maybe she put her eyes on a Jewish man, which parenthetically, again, I have to mention it again. This is another reason why Reform and conservative conversions are completely non-binding, is in many of the cases they're done in the express context of marriage. There's a man, a Jewish man, dating a non-Jewish woman, and to make the marriage kosher, they'll go and convert the woman. That means that she's doing the conversion with the express intent to marry the man. Had the relationship broken up right then and there, she would be not interested in becoming a Jew. Same with the other side. They convert non-Jewish men with the express intent of getting a marriage going, which is completely invalid. And so I mentioned that again to make the point that only Orthodox conversions are considered to be fully kosher according to Jewish law. And it has to be with no ulterior motives. Says the Rambam, if after the research we find that there's no other motive, we also notify them the heaviness of the yoke of the Torah, and the bother that it imposes on people of the world doing the Torah and mitzvahs, with the purpose of getting them to retract. We don't encourage converts. We're the only religion in the world that doesn't proselytize. If you're not Jewish, we're not trying to make you Jewish. You have a purpose in this world in being a Gentile. Don't try to become Jewish. But if they're pushing, we're going to push back. And we'll tell them, being a Jew is tough. It's not easy being fully observant. Im kiblu v'loy pershu. But if they accepted upon themselves this yoke and they didn't retract, and we can see that they're returning out of love to this faith, then we receive them. Shanemar, as it says, by Ruth, famous Jewish convert, in fact, the ancestor of King David and therefore of King Mashiach. It says, Vatera ki misametzes lalechas ita. Naomi saw that Ruth was pushing to go with her, and she stopped talking to her. Naomi had 2 sons who unfortunately married non-Jewish women, and when the sons died, both of the non-Jewish women stuck with their mother-in-law, Orpah and Ruth. Orpah was eventually dissuaded. She said, go home, go back to your people. And Naomi tried to get Ruth also to go back to her people, but Ruth said, no, I'm going with you. Ameich ami, Elokayich Elokai. Your nation is my nation, your God is my God. I want to become Jewish. And what does the verse say? When she saw that she was pushing, in other words, you have to push back, and only when she saw that Ruth was pushing even back and did want to stay, that's when she realized she was genuine and stopped and allowed her to come with her. That's the ideal scenario in which conversion takes place. Lefichach, by the way, it says that Rambam, therefore, like Kiblu Beis Din Geidim Kol Yimei David Shlema, all the days of King David and King Solomon's reign, the courts officially did not do conversions. Bimei David, in the days of David, Shema Min Apachad Chazru, because maybe there was fear. David fought many wars and won them all. So they were worried. Maybe people are converting just out of fear. Ubimei Shloima, in the days of King Solomon, Shema B'Shvil HaMalchus, V'HaToiva, V'HaGdula, Shahayu Ba Yisrael Chazru. Maybe because of the great kingship, the great good that the Jewish people enjoyed at that time. Maybe that's why they want to come Jewish. Because anybody who returns from the ways of idol worship just for some vanity reason is not a righteous convert. That's why the courts didn't take conversions, because they were worried there were ulterior motives. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, nevertheless, how you gave him harbe misguided b'mei David u'shleima. To the chagrin of the courts, there were many people that were converting in the days of King David and King Solomon, b'fnei hadyotos, in the presence of ignoramuses, regular people, not authorized people. End of the day, because they converted with the right intentions, and here's the commentaries point out again, they did accept upon themselves the yoke of Torah and mitzvahs. They couldn't get to the courts because the courts didn't let them. They were worried about ulterior motives. But when they converted in the presence of these regular people, they were doing it fully. They were not today like these movements that convert without full acceptance of the yoke of Torah. They were fully converted. They were just using the wrong courts. So the Supreme Court, the Supreme Courts did worry, did suspect, keep watch on them. They didn't push them away completely since they had immersed, but they didn't bring them close either until it was determined what would happen to them in their end. In other words, they waited, time will tell, and whatever happened with these converts would reveal whether they were authentic or non-authentic converts. So now, returning to the issue at hand, the Rambam giving us some historical context. How conversion should look, and how conversion practically did look in the days of King David and King Solomon. So against that backdrop, since we know that Shlomo HaMelech converted some women to marry them, and so did Samson convert some women to marry them. And now we know that these women did not convert authentically or genuinely. They converted for a specific reason, not by the authority of the courts. The Torah considers it as though they're still idol worshipping and as though they're still prohibited. Even though, of course, as we just said, it was against the court's desire, but people were converted in those days, and they were considered valid if their end revealed that they were behaving in the proper way. So here also, initially they were full Jews. They weren't Gentiles. They're just called Gentiles because they were converted in an improper time and an improper way. Furthermore, Torah is justified in calling them idol worshippers because in the end, their end did reveal that it wasn't genuine in the beginning. They used to serve their own idols. They built themselves altars. And the Torah, in the end, considers it as Shlomo HaMelech himself built the altars. As it says, then Shlomo built an altar. Even though, of course, it wasn't Shlomo himself that built it, it was these women, but it was attributed to him because he was the one who brought about this negative end. It's interesting to point out that, I want to just move back to the beginning, in Halacha 14, where the Rambam introduced this whole concept. So he goes to some lengthy words. It gets poetic. Shimshon, who rescued the Jewish people. Shlomo, the king of Israel, the friend of God. The secret of the matter. So the Rebbe has a letter where he once addressed this issue, and he said that if you look in the Talmud, there's two opinions on the nature of Shimshon. Whether he was rebellious towards Hashem, or he was considered to be godlike. The word Shimshon comes from the word Shemesh. Like the sun shielded the world, says the Torah, so too did Shimshon shield the Jewish people. And in the Zohar, fascinatingly, which is the mystical, esoteric element of the Torah, the Zohar rules like the first way, that Shimshon actually wasn't as great as he's made out to be. Whenever the Rambam, in his book, rules on an argument like this, there's two opinions in the Talmud, and he rules like one of them, he'll always include kind of in a hidden way, he'll include some language to explain why he's negating the opinion that he's negating. So here, the Rambam wishes to rule that Shimshon was from the greatest of the great, not like the opinion that says he was rebellious. So the Rambam sticks in Shimshon HaMoshiach es Yisrael. He gives him that extra title to bring out how great he is. And he adds the word Sod Hadavar, the secret of the matter, to show that even according to the mystical element of the Torah, that's how we should rule. Although the Zohar seems to imply otherwise, according to the Rambam, even on the secret level of the Torah, even on the mystical level of the Torah, Shimshon is considered to be completely great and justified in the woman that he married. And it also relates to a more Hasidic interpretation of this whole story, in which it relates to the general theme of the Jewish people redeeming sparks that are present in elements outside of the holy domain, which are reserved for extremely special people to do. The regular people like you and I don't have the power or the authority to invest ourselves in those areas, but the greatest of the great, they do have the power to go in there without becoming contaminated themselves. And into that category is where Shimshon and Shlomo HaMelech certainly belonged. Says the Rambam Halacha Yud Zayin, Ger shalei bodku acharav. If a convert never had research done about him, or during his conversion process, he was never notified about the mitzvahs or their punishments, and he underwent circumcision, conversion in front of 3 regular people, nevertheless, he's considered to be a convert. Bottom line is he's keeping all the mitzvahs. Bottom line, he's living a Jewish life. Even if some of the parts of the process were left out, he's a convert. Even if it became known, it was discovered that he's converting for an ulterior motive, since the bottom line is he did a conversion and he did a circumcision and he did an immersion, he has left the category of being considered an idol-worshipping Gentile, but we will still be suspect of him till it's revealed that he's actually righteous. Nevertheless, once a convert becomes a convert, even if he went back, retracted, so to speak, and went back to serve idols, at this point, once you become Jewish, you can't revoke that. He's just like an apostate Jew. Kiddushin, whose marriage is a valid marriage, so you have to return his lost object if you find it. Because he has immersed, he becomes like a full Jew. And that's why Solomon and Samson kept their wives, even though in the end their secret was revealed. Because at the time of the conversion, it was a valid conversion, and it was only that it was revealed later that they became an apostate. But once you become a Jew, you become a Jew. And again, here I must point out, the commentaries say, we're talking about a case where the convert fully accepted the Jewish religion, not these bogus conversions that we see today in certain movements where they don't even take upon themselves to begin with the full yoke of Torah. Over there, of course, the conversions aren't a conversion to begin with. Here we're talking about when somebody converts fully Orthodox and then unfortunately makes the wrong decision and goes back, that's where the Torah rules that he remains a complete Jew, because a Jew, once you become a Jew, is a Jew forever. Because of this whole topic, and because it gets complicated, and it gets controversial, and it gets painful when we deal with the subject of converts, our sages said, Koshim lahem geirim liyisrael kenegat saras. Converts are difficult for the Jewish people like leprosy. Sheruban chayzrin b'shvil davar, because many of them convert initially for ulterior motives. Umatin es Yisrael, and they mislead, they fool the Jewish people. The kosha hadavar lifresh mehem achash and yizgayro, and it's very hard. That's how it is. They join our communities, they become intertwined and intermingled, and it's hard to separate from them after they become converted. You don't have to go far into Jewish history to see how this worked out. Go and learn from the very first incidents. Right after the Jewish people became a nation. What happened in the desert? The golden calf. Kivres HaTaiva is the area where the Jewish people complained against the food God was supplying them, and many people were killed there. The Chen Reiv HaNisyonis, most of the tests in the desert, who was at the forefront? Who was leading the charge of rebellion against God? Ha'asafsuf ha'yuba and tchila. It was the asafsuf, which is the terminology used for those that had joined the Jewish nation and weren't born into them. They were the instigators of the big problems. And so too it's been throughout history. The non-Jewish people who have come to our communities out of the wrong reasons have ended up becoming a source, not of joy or pleasure, but pain for the Jewish people. And hence the Rambam says, as the sages said, that we don't consider converts to be the greatest element in our community. Nevertheless, that's when we're talking about converts that have come with the wrong reasons. As I mentioned before in the beginning of the chapter, that Rambam writes elsewhere, that if it's a convert who converts authentically and truly embraces the religion and taka actually becomes a fully functioning part of the Jewish people, not only is he considered equal to the Jewish person, but even greater in the fact that we only have genealogical roots of our Judaism, and he has a Judaism that is connected directly to Misha Amar V'Haya Ha'olam, to the one who has spoken the world into being, to Hashem himself.